The bridge went in the space of a heartbeat, and the Duke of Rothmere was in the river before he had finished understanding what he had seen. It had been raining for 9 days. The Rothmere Valley, which the Duke's family had held for 300 years, lay under a sky that had forgotten how to be dry, and the river Roth, usually a placid brown thing you could ford in summer, had become a roaring gray monster, swollen far past its banks, tearing whole trees from the hillsides and flinging them downstream like kindling. The Duke had ridden out that morning against all advice, because he was the master of the valley, and the valley was drowning, and it was not in him to sit in a dry house while his tenants fought the flood. And he had come near noon to the old stone bridge at Miller's Crossing, where a knot of villagers stood watching the water climb toward the arches, and where a young woman was, at that exact moment, halfway across. She should not have been on the bridge. No one should have been on the bridge. But the Duke would learn, later, why she was. That she was a housemaid from the village, Nell Baxter by name, and that a child had been stranded on the far side, the miller's little boy, cut off by the rising water, and that Nell had been the only one willing to cross the groaning bridge to fetch him, while the men hesitated and calculated, because Nell Baxter was the sort of person who does not calculate when there is a child to be reached. She had crossed and got the boy, and handed him to safety on the near bank, and had turned to come back across herself. And it was then, with the child saved and Nell alone in the middle of the span, that the river won, and the old bridge, undermined by 9 days of flood, simply folded, the center giving way all at once, and Nell Baxter went down into the gray roaring water with the stones. The villagers screamed. No one moved. To go into that river was to die. Every soul on the bank knew it. The water was a killing torrent, and a swimmer in it would be smashed against the rocks and drowned in a minute. And there was not a man there who did not want to help, and not a man there who did not know, with cold certainty, that help meant 2 deaths instead of 1. The Duke of Rothmere did not make that calculation. He would think about it, afterward, would try to reconstruct what had gone through his mind in the instant between seeing Nell go under and finding himself in the water, and would conclude that nothing had gone through his mind at all, that some part of him deeper than thought had simply refused, utterly and without deliberation, to stand on a bank and watch a woman drown for the crime of having saved a child. He tore off his coat and his boots. He heard someone shouting his name, "Your Grace, no, Your Grace, you'll be killed." And he ignored it, and he went off the broken end of the bridge into the flood. The cold hit him like a wall. The current took him at once, exactly as the villagers had known it would, and flung him downstream, and the Duke of Rothmere, who was a strong swimmer, who had swum in this river as a boy before it turned monster, fought it with everything he had, not against the current, which no man could fight, but across it, angling his body through the roaring water toward the dark shape of Nell Baxter's gown, where it had snagged, for the moment, on the branches of a fallen tree jammed against the ruined pier. He had seconds. He knew he had seconds. The tree would give, or she would slip free of it, and then the river would carry her into the rapids below the crossing, and there would be no saving her, and very likely no saving him. He reached her as the branches began to tear loose. He got an arm around her. She was conscious, barely, choking, terrified, clutching at him with the blind strength of the drowning, and then the tree let go, and the river had them both. What followed, the villagers running along the bank would describe for the rest of their lives, and none of them could ever quite say how the Duke did it. He could not swim against the current with a half-drowned woman in his arms. No one could, so he did not try. He let the river carry them, and he fought only to keep both their heads above the water and to steer, by inches, toward the near bank, using the current instead of fighting it, angling across it as the flood swept them down through the crossing and toward the white water below. Twice they went under. Twice the Duke dragged them up. He took a blow from a submerged rock that would leave him black from hip to knee for a month, and at the last possible moment, at the very lip of the rapids, where the river narrowed and quickened toward the killing rocks, a great root reached out from the flooded bank, an old willow, half torn from the earth by the flood, its roots trailing in the water, and the Duke of Rothmere got one hand around it and held. He held against the whole weight of the river, one arm locked around a drowning maid, and one hand locked around a willow root, while the flood tried to tear them both away, and he held, And he held, and the villagers reached the bank above him, and made a chain of their bodies in their hands and hauled, and slowly, terribly, against the fury of the water, they drew the Duke of Rothmere and Nell Baxter out of the river and onto the flooded bank, alive, both of them, streaming, and battered, and breathing. The Duke lay on the mud with the half-drowned Maid in his arms, and could not, for a while, do anything but shake, and neither could she, and the two of them lay there in the rain among the shouting villagers, soaked and frozen and alive, clinging to each other with the desperate wordless grip of two people who have just been, together, to the very edge of death, and been dragged back, and the Duke of Rothmere, holding the shuddering girl against his chest, understood, in some place beyond thought, that whatever came after, his life had just divided into before and after this river, and that he would never again be entirely the man he had been on the near bank before he jumped. The valley never forgot that afternoon, and it changed how the valley saw its Duke, as much as it changed the Duke himself. For the people of Rothmere had known their master, before the flood, as a distant thing, a cold, correct figure who administered them fairly enough through his stewards, but who had never, in 17 years, seemed to see them as anything but figures in a ledger. They had not disliked him. They had simply never expected anything of him, the way one does not expect warmth of a statue. And then, on the worst day of the great flood, they had watched that cold, correct statue tear off his coat and go into the killing river after a village housemaid, had watched a duke risk his own life, without a heartbeat's hesitation, for one of them, for the lowest of them, for a servant girl, and something shifted in the valley that afternoon that would never shift back. Nor did it end at the river's edge. The Duke, once Nell was carried to safety, did not go home to his dry house to recover, though he was battered half to pieces and shaking with cold. He stayed. Streaming and bruised, he spent the rest of that terrible day working alongside his own tenants in the flood, hauling sandbags, freeing trapped livestock, carrying the old and the young to high ground, giving orders and then, more astonishingly, taking them, deferring to the farmers who knew the river better than he did, a duke working shoulder to shoulder in the mud, with men who had never in their lives stood within 10 feet of him. He opened Rothmere itself to the flooded-out families, threw wide the great cold house that had stood empty and grand for generations, and filled its halls with wet, frightened villagers and their children and their few salvaged possessions, and saw them fed and warmed at his own table, and did not once, all that long day and night, behave like a man conferring charity, only like a man who had finally understood that the valley was his, not as property, but as responsibility, and that these were his people, and that he had slept through 17 years of his duty to them, and meant to sleep no longer. By the time the flood receded, 3 days later, the Duke of Rothmere was a different man in the eyes of every soul in the valley, and, more to the point, a different man in his own. He had discovered, in the mud and the cold and the shared desperate work, the thing his rank had hidden from him his whole life, that he was happiest, most alive, most himself, not standing apart and above, but standing among, shoulder to shoulder, useful, connected, one man among his people, rather than a statue on a hill. The numbness had been the distance, and the flood had washed the distance away, and left him standing knee-deep in the wreckage of his valley, alive, awake, and, for the first time in 17 years, home. And at the center of all of it, the still point around which the whole transformation turned, was the memory of a housemaid crossing a bridge for a child who was not hers, and going down into the flood, and the terrible clarifying instant in which the Duke of Rothmere had discovered that there was, after all, something in the world he could not bear to lose. He had not known her name when he went in after her. He knew it now, and he understood, 3 days later, standing exhausted in his flood-scoured valley, that he was not going to be able to let Nell Baxter walk back down to the village and become a pair of hands again, because she was not the woman he had rescued. She was the woman who had rescued him from 17 years of sleep, with nothing but the sight of her crossing a bridge no one else would cross. They carried her to Rothmere, because it was nearest and warmest, and because the Duke would not hear of her being taken anywhere else, and Nell Baxter, housemaid, orphan and reluctant heroine, woke the next morning in a bed grander than any room she had ever entered, in the great house of the man who had gone into the river after her, and could not at first believe any of it was real. The Duke came to see her that first morning, once the physician had pronounced her out of danger, bruised and strained, and chilled to the bone, but young and strong and whole. He came stiffly, for he was black and blue himself, and moved like an old man, and he stood at a careful distance from the bed, with the awkwardness of a man who does not know how to be in a sick room. And Nell, propped against her pillows, looked at the Duke of Rothmere, and did not know what to say to him either, because how does a housemaid thank a duke for going into a flood after her? And how does a duke receive the thanks? And the two of them regarded each other across an unbridgeable gulf of rank, and a bridgeable one of shared near death, and neither knew which to honor. "You should not have done it," Nell said at last, which was not what she had meant to say. "Gone in after me, your grace. You might have died. You very nearly did. I felt you take that rock. I heard it. I thought we were both finished. A duke does not go into a flood after a housemaid. You should have let me go. I am not. It was not worth your life. I am a housemaid. You are the Duke of Rothmere. The arithmetic of it is all wrong. You should not have done it, and I do not know how to thank you for doing it. And I have been lying here since I woke, feeling that I owe you a debt I can never in 100 lifetimes repay. And it is a terrible feeling, your grace, to owe someone your whole life and have nothing to pay it with. So I will just say what I can, which is, thank you, and I am sorry, both at once. Thank you for my life, and sorry that saving it cost you so dear and gained you nothing." The Duke of Rothmere looked at her for a moment. "You have the arithmetic wrong," he said. "You have it entirely wrong, and I find I cannot let you lie there believing it, so I am going to correct it, though I am not a man much practiced in saying such things, and I will likely do it badly. You say a duke does not go into a flood after a housemaid, and that the arithmetic is all wrong. A great life risked for a small one. But that is exactly the arithmetic I refuse, Miss Baxter. And it is the arithmetic the whole world runs on, and I have decided, as of yesterday, that I am finished with it. There is no such thing as a great life and a small one. There is no arithmetic in which your life is worth less than mine, because I was born in this house, and you were born in the village. You went onto that bridge, a bridge grown men would not cross, to save a child who was not yours, expecting nothing, and you got him to safety, and it cost you nearly everything. And if that is the act of a person whose life is worth less than mine, then I have never understood the word worth at all. I did not go into the river after a housemaid. I went in after the bravest person in the valley, who had just done a finer thing than I have done in my whole comfortable life, and I would do it again this moment, bruises and all, and I will not have you lying in my house calling yourself small and your life not worth the saving, because it is the one thing I heard in the water that I cannot bear, that you thought, going under, that you were not worth coming after. You were, you are. Do not thank me for it, and do not apologize for it. Just believe it. That is all I ask. Believe that you were worth the river. And Nell Baxter, who had been an orphan and a servant her whole life, and had never once in all that life been told that she was worth anything at all, let alone worth a duke's life, put her face in her hands and wept. The first time she had wept since the flood, since long before the flood. And the Duke of Rothmere stood by her bed, black and blue and helpless, and did not know what to do with a weeping woman, and did the only thing he could think of, which was to stay, and not leave, and be a solid presence in the room while she cried, until she had finished. It was in those long convalescent days, sitting with her because he could not stay away, that the Duke of Rothmere discovered how to talk to another human being, a skill he had somehow reached 39 without acquiring. For he had never, in his whole insulated life, simply sat and talked with someone who wanted nothing from him. His conversations had been transactions, with stewards, with peers, with the ambitious mamas who paraded their daughters, all of them angling for something, all of them performing, and Nell Baxter, propped in her grand borrowed bed, angled for nothing, and performed nothing, and answered his stiff, awkward questions with a dry directness that startled him into directness of his own, until, by slow degrees, over the quiet convalescent afternoons, the coldest man in 3 counties found himself actually talking, telling her things he had never told anyone, because she asked, and listened, and did not flatter, and made it somehow safe. He told her about the numbness. He had never named it before, even to himself, but he named it to Nell, haltingly, because she asked him, with the fearless curiosity of a woman who had nearly died beside him and felt the ordinary rules suspended, why a man with everything seemed so joyless. And the Duke, instead of taking offense, found himself answering. "I inherited very young," he said. "My father died when I was 22, and I became the Duke of Rothmere before I had finished being anyone else. And I discovered that the title is a kind of wall, that once you are the Duke, no one ever again speaks to the man, only to the rank. Everyone wants something. Everyone performs. And after enough years of it, you stop expecting anything else, and you build your own wall to match theirs, and you go cold, because caring is only a way of being disappointed, and wanting is only a way of being hunted. So I stopped caring, and stopped wanting, and called it dignity, and told myself I was content. I was not content. I was asleep. I had been asleep for 17 years now, and I did not even know it, because a man who has been asleep long enough forgets there is any other way to be, until something wakes him." He looked at her. "You woke me. On that bridge. I stood on the bank and watched you cross for the miller's boy, a thing no man there would do, and something in me that had been asleep for 17 years opened one eye. And then the bridge went, and you went with it, and the eye came fully open, and I was in the water before I knew it, and for the first time since I was 22, I was entirely awake and entirely alive, because there was finally something in the world I could not bear to lose. Do you understand what you did? You did not only let me save your life, you gave me mine back. I had mislaid it somewhere around my father's funeral, and you handed it to me in a flood, and you do not even know you did it." And Nell Baxter, who had spent her whole life being useful to people, and never once being told she had given anyone anything they could not have hired her to give, was quiet for a long moment. "I have never," she said slowly, "been anything to anyone but a pair of hands. That is what a servant is, Your Grace. A pair of hands, that lights the fire and empties the slops and is not, particularly, a person. I have been a good pair of hands. I have kept my brothers fed and clothed, and got them apprenticed, and I have scrubbed a great many floors, and I have been, I hope, useful. But no one has ever told me I gave them anything but service. And now you tell me I gave you your life back, not by being saved, but by being myself, on a bridge, without meaning anything by it. I only crossed the bridge because the boy was there, and no one else would go. I did not mean to wake anyone. I did not know anyone was watching, or asleep, or anything at all." She shook her head, wondering. "It is a strange thing to be told, Your Grace, that the ordinary things you do, the things you never thought anyone saw, that one of them reached inside a man and woke him. I do not know what to do with it, but I find I am glad. That something I did, without meaning to, gave someone back their life. Even a duke's, even yours, perhaps especially yours, because you went into a river for me after, and a pair of hands is not worth a river, but a person who woke a sleeping man might be. Perhaps that is the arithmetic that makes it come out right. I have been trying to make it come out right since I woke in this bed, and perhaps that is the sum. You gave me my life in the river, and I gave you yours on the bridge, and now we are even, and neither of us owes the other anything, and we can simply be two people who woke each other up. I like that sum a great deal better than the debt. Let us use that one." "Let us use that one," the Duke agreed, and something in his chest that had been asleep for 17 years stretched and warmed and settled, and he understood that he was never going to be able to let this woman walk back down to the village and become a pair of hands again, because she was not a pair of hands. She was the person who had woken him, and there was no arithmetic in the world that could make that worth less than a coronet. He came every day after that. He told himself it was to see that she was healing. It was not only that, and he half knew it was not, and he came anyway, because he had discovered, in the days after the flood, that he did not want to be anywhere Nell Baxter was not, that the maid he had pulled from the river had become, in the strange, intense way of shared catastrophe, the most important person in his valley, and that the great cold house that had bored him his whole life had become interesting again the moment she was in it. For the Duke of Rothmere had been, before the flood, a man half asleep. He was not cruel, like some of the dukes in these tales. He was worse, in a way. He was indifferent, disengaged, a man who had inherited a great valley and a great fortune and a great emptiness, and who had filled the emptiness with nothing, because nothing had ever seemed worth the filling. He had gone through the motions of his life, the estate, the duties, the long gray years, with a competent hollowness, feeling little, wanting less, waiting, without knowing he was waiting for something to make him feel alive. And then he had gone into a flood after a drowning maid, and had felt, in the killing water with her life in his arms, more alive than he had felt in the whole of his hollow years, and he had understood, lying on the mud, that the numbness had not been peace, but a kind of slow death, and that the woman who had shaken him out of it was lying half-drowned in his arms, and that he was not going to be able to go back to sleep now that she had woken him. He learned her, over the days of her recovery, the way one learns a person one cannot stay away from. He learned that she was 23, orphaned young, that she had raised 2 younger brothers on a housemaid's wages and seen them apprenticed to good trades before she let herself rest, and that she had spent her whole life caring for others and being cared for by no one, that she was quick and dry and brave and entirely without self-pity, and that she had gone onto the bridge for the miller's boy for the simplest reason in the world, which was that no one else would, and the child could not be left. She was, the Duke came to understand, exactly what she had been in the river, a person who did the hard right thing without calculating the cost, and expected nothing, and thought herself no one. And the more he learned her, the more completely he fell. Not the gratitude of a rescuer, nor the pity of a duke, but the plain, helpless love of a man who has been woken from a long numbness by the finest person he has ever met, and cannot imagine going back to sleep. There was, of course, the gulf. He was a duke, she was a housemaid. The whole weight of the world lay between them, and both of them knew it, and it was Nell, practical, clear-eyed Nell, who named it first, because she would not let herself be swept, even by gratitude, even by the growing warmth she could feel and would not name, into hoping for a thing the world did not permit. She named it on the day she was well enough to leave, standing in the great hall of Rothmere in her own plain mended gown, which had been washed and dried and returned to her, ready to walk back down to the village and her old life. "I have to go back, Your Grace," she said. "You know that I do. I am a housemaid, and I am well now, and I cannot stay in your great house being looked after like a lady. It is not my place, and every servant in this house knows it is not my place, and they have been very kind, but they are beginning to wonder, and so is the village, and so, if you are honest, are you. I owe you my life, and I will owe it to you until I die, and I will bless your name every day of that life. But I cannot pay that debt by staying here and letting the whole valley talk, and letting you grow, letting either of us grow, accustomed to a thing that cannot be. So I am going to go back down to the village, and back into service somewhere, and be what I am, and you are going to let me, because you are a good man, and a good man does not keep a housemaid in his house past her healing, however much either of them might, in a foolish moment, wish otherwise." Her voice caught, just slightly, on the last of it, and she pressed on past it. "Thank you for my life, Your Grace, and thank you for telling me I was worth the river. I will carry that with me always, but I have to go now, before the carrying gets too heavy. Goodbye." And she curtsied, and turned to go, and the Duke of Rothmere, who had spent his whole life letting things go, because nothing had ever seemed worth holding on to, discovered that he was not, this time, going to let go. "No," he said. Nell stopped. "I have been thinking," the Duke said, "about arithmetic. You keep doing arithmetic, Nell, the arithmetic of place, of rank, of what a housemaid may and may not hope for. And it is the same arithmetic I refused when I went into the river, the arithmetic that says your life is worth less than mine, and I refused it then, and I refuse it now, in this hall, completely. You say you cannot stay because you are a housemaid, and I am a duke, and the valley will talk. And I say, let the valley talk. Let the whole world talk. I have spent 39 years being the Duke of Rothmere, asleep in a great cold house, feeling nothing, wanting nothing, half dead, and calling it dignity. And then a housemaid crossed a bridge no man would cross, and drowned in front of me, and I went into a flood after her, and I woke up. For the first time in my life, Nell, in that killing water, I was awake. I felt everything, and what I felt, holding your life in my arms while the river tried to take us both, was that I would rather die in that river with you than live another year of the numb, comfortable death I called my life. That is not gratitude. That is not a rescuer's fancy. That is a man who was asleep and has been woken and knows exactly who woke him and cannot, will not, go back to sleep. He crossed the hall to her. You told me to believe I could not have you because of the arithmetic, and I am telling you that I have thrown the arithmetic in the river. I am a duke, and I may marry where I choose, and I choose you, the bravest, finest, most alive person in my valley, who woke me from a 39-year sleep and has no idea she did it. Do not go back into service. Stay, not as a maid, as my wife, as the Duchess of Rothmere. Marry me, Nell Baxter. Let the valley talk itself hoarse. I have been dead for years, and you have made me alive, and I am not going to let you walk back down to the village and be what the arithmetic says you must be, when you could stay here and be what you actually are, which is the finest woman in England, and the only one I will ever want. Nell Baxter stared at him, white-faced. You cannot, she whispered. Your Grace, Julian, you cannot mean it. A duke and a housemaid. Your family, your whole world. They will never, I would be a scandal, a disgrace. They would say you had lost your mind, that I had trapped you, they will say all of it, the Duke agreed, for about a year, and then they will meet you, and they will stop, because it is not possible to meet you and go on believing you a disgrace. It is only possible to believe it from a distance, in ignorance, which is where all such beliefs live. And even if they never stop, Nell, listen to me. I spent 39 years arranging my life to please a world whose opinion I have just discovered I do not value in the slightest, because that world would have had me stand on the bank and watch you drown to preserve the arithmetic, and I went into the river instead, and I have never been so certain of anything in my life as I was in that water. The world's opinion nearly cost you your life on that bank. When the men stood calculating, I am finished with the world's opinion. It is a coward's god, and I will not worship it any longer. I want you. I do not care what it costs me. I have discovered that there is nothing it can cost me that is worth more than you, because everything else I have, the rank, the fortune, the great cold house, the good opinion of people I do not even like, all of it, I would trade the whole of it for one more minute of being as alive as I was in that river with you. Marry me, please. I have been asleep my whole life. Do not make me go back to sleep now that I know what it is to be awake. And Nell Baxter, orphan, housemaid, who had raised 2 brothers on nothing, and crossed a bridge no man would cross, and thought herself no one her whole life, looked at the Duke of Rothmere, alive and pleading and utterly transformed, offering her not a rescue but a partnership, not charity but his whole woken heart, and she felt the careful arithmetic she had done her whole life, the arithmetic of a person who has learned to expect nothing, finally give way before a thing too large for it to measure. You went into the river after me, she said, wonderingly, and now you will go against the whole world for me. I have spent my life caring for people who could not care for me back. My brothers, the families I served, the miller's boy on the bridge. I have never once, in 23 years, had someone choose me, put me first, come after me, want me for myself. And you have done it twice now, into a flood and against the world. And I do not know how to be chosen, Julian. I have never learned, but I find I would like to learn. With you. The tears were falling now, but she was smiling through them. Yes, God help us both, and God help your poor family, and let the whole valley talk until it drops. Yes, I will marry you. I will stay. I will learn to be chosen, and I will spend the rest of my life choosing you back, which I already do, which I have done, I think, since I felt you take that rock and knew you would rather break yourself than let me go. Yes, and the Duke of Rothmere gathered the maid he had pulled from the river into his arms in the great hall of Rothmere, awake and alive and chosen, both of them, at last, and the numb gray years fell away and did not come back. The family came, of course, before the wedding, for a duke does not announce his intention to marry a housemaid without his relations descending in force to prevent it. And the chief of them was the duke's aunt, the Dowager Marchioness of Stane, a magnificent and glacial old woman who had ruled the family's ambitions for 40 years, and who arrived at Rothmere in a fury barely contained by 60 years of breeding. She did not waste time. "You cannot marry a housemaid, Rothmere," she said, the moment she had him alone. "I do not care what she did on a bridge. I do not care that you fished her out of a river. It was very gallant, and it will make a charming story, and you will settle a sum on the girl and find her a respectable husband in the village, and that will be the end of it. What you will not do is make her the Duchess of Rothmere. The thing is impossible. The name, 300 years, Rothmere, the name will not survive it. You will be a laughingstock. She will be cut by every family of consequence in England. Your children will be the grandchildren of a scullery maid. I forbid it. The family forbids it. Come to your senses." And the Duke of Rothmere, who a year before would have found the whole confrontation too tiresome to fight and might simply have surrendered out of sheer indifference, looked at his aunt with the clear, awake eyes the river had given him, and answered her without heat and without yielding. "Aunt," he said, "a month ago I stood on a riverbank and watched a housemaid drown in front of a crowd of grown men who would not go in after her, because the arithmetic said her life was not worth the risk of theirs. And I understood, standing there, that arithmetic, the arithmetic that weighs a housemaid's life against a gentleman's and finds it lighter, is the same arithmetic you are reciting to me now. It is the arithmetic that says the name matters more than the woman, that consequence matters more than the person, that a scullery maid's granddaughter is a lesser thing than a marchioness's. And I went into the river against that arithmetic, aunt. I threw it into the flood with my own body, and I came out with the certainty that it is a lie, the oldest and cruelest lie there is, and I am not going to pick it back up now to please you, or the family, or 300 years of a name that will survive perfectly well, because names are tougher than you think, and a great deal less important than you believe." "You are besotted," the dowager said coldly. "It will pass, and you will be left married to a maid." "I am awake," the duke said, "for the first time in 17 years. And I would rather be awake and married to Nell Baxter than asleep and married to the most suitable heiress in England, because I have tried the second and it was a slow death, and I have had 1 month of the first, and it is the only living I have ever done. You call her a housemaid. I call her the bravest and finest person in this valley, who crossed a bridge no man would cross, and thought her own life not worth saving, because the world had told her so, all her days. The same world you are speaking for now. I am done speaking for that world, aunt. It very nearly let her drown. It can have no opinion I am obliged to respect." He rose, signaling the interview's end. "You may attend the wedding or not, as you choose. You may accept her or not. But understand that if you do not, if you or any of the family cut her, or slight her, or treat her as 1 shade less than the Duchess she will be, then it is not Nell you will lose. It is me. I will simply cease to know anyone who cannot know my wife, however grand their name, and I find, having been awake a month, that I can part with the good opinion of the entire family, without losing a single hour's sleep. So choose, aunt, exactly as I have chosen. I have chosen her. What do you choose?" And the Dowager Marchioness of Stane, who had come to Rothmere certain of victory, found herself facing a nephew she did not recognize. Not the indifferent sleepwalker she had managed for years, but a fully woken man with nothing left to fear, because a man who has been into a killing flood and out again is not a man who can be frightened by the withdrawal of a drawing room's approval. She had no weapon that could reach him, and being, whatever else she was, not a stupid woman, she recognized a rout when she was in one, and did the shrewd thing rather than the ruinous one. "You have changed," she said at last, studying him. "I did not think you could. You were the most immovable, indifferent creature I ever knew, and now you speak like a man on fire." "Well," she was silent a moment. "I do not approve. I will never approve. It is against everything I was raised to. I am too old to change my bones. But I have watched a great many men marry the suitable heiress and go gray and hollow, exactly as you were going. And I have never once before seen a Rothmere man look the way you look now, alive and certain and unafraid. Perhaps the girl is worth it. I do not understand it. But I have lived long enough to know that I do not understand everything, which is a thing most people my age never learn." She rose and gathered her formidable dignity. "I will come to the wedding. I will not cut her. I will reserve my judgment, and I will watch. And if she is half what you say, I will, in time, and grudgingly, and never admitting it, come round. That is the most you will get from me, Rothmere, and it is a great deal more than I came here intending to give, and you have your drowned housemaid to thank for it, since it appears she has done the one thing no one has managed in 40 years, which is to turn you into a man worth arguing with." And she swept out. And she did come to the wedding, and she did not cut Nell, and she did, in time, and grudgingly, and never once admitting it, come entirely round, because it was not possible to know Nell Baxter and fail to. They were married before the winter, and the valley did talk, exactly as predicted. And then it met the new Duchess, and, exactly as predicted, it stopped. For Nell, Duchess of Rothmere, was no more able to be resented up close than the sun is. The valley had known her, of course, before. The brave housemaid who crossed the bridge, the orphan who raised her brothers. And the valley had loved her already, in the way one loves a good neighbor, and it discovered that it loved her no less for the coronet, and rather more, because she wore the coronet exactly as she had worn the housemaid's cap, as a thing that changed her circumstances, and not her heart. She knew every family in the valley, having been one of them. She knew what it was to be cold and hungry and overlooked, and she never forgot it. And there was no soul in the whole of Rothmere's 300 years of tenants who had ever been so seen, so cared for, so defended, as they were by the housemaid who became their duchess. The great cold house filled with warmth. The valley, which had been administered for generations by indifferent masters, was loved for the first time in living memory, and the Duke of Rothmere, awake at last, loved it alongside her, the two of them remaking the whole valley, in the image of the woman who had crossed a bridge for a child who was not hers. And the flood, which had so nearly taken her, became the valley's dearest legend. The day the Maid crossed the bridge and the Duke went into the river, the day the Master of Rothmere threw the arithmetic of rank into the flood and came out with a duchess. They rebuilt the bridge at Miller's Crossing, stronger than before, and the Duke had it named, over Nell's laughing protests, Baxter Bridge, so that every soul who crossed it for 100 years would ask why a Duke's bridge bore a housemaid's name, and be told the story, and understand that a life is a life, and that there is no arithmetic in which any person is worth less than any other, and that the Master of the Valley had proven it with his own body in the flood. Late in their long life, one of their granddaughters, a girl of the new generation, growing up a lady, who had never wanted for anything, asked the old Duchess whether it was true, the story they told in the village, that grandmother had once been a housemaid, and that grandfather had gone into a flood after her. "It is true," said the Duchess of Rothmere, "all of it. I was a housemaid, and I crossed a broken bridge to fetch the miller's little boy, because no one else would, and the bridge went into the flood, and took me with it. And your grandfather, who was then the coldest, sleepiest, most indifferent man in 3 counties, though you would never believe it to know him now, went into the river after me, when every sensible person on the bank knew it meant 2 deaths instead of 1, and he pulled me out. And then he did a braver thing than going into the river, which was to go against the whole world and marry me, a housemaid, and make me his duchess, and never once look back." She drew the girl close. "And I will tell you the lesson of it, my darling, because it is the only thing I know worth passing on, and I bought it in a flood. The world will always tell you that some lives are worth more than others, that the Duke matters more than the housemaid, the rich more than the poor, The high-born more than the low. It is the oldest lie there is, and the cruelest, and nearly everyone believes it, and it is a lie. Every life is worth the river. Every single one. Your grandfather knew it when he jumped, and he built a bridge with my name on it, so that no one would ever forget it, and I have spent my whole life since proving it true, one valley at a time. When you are grown and grand, and the world tells you that some people are small and their lives do not signify, you remember Baxter Bridge, and the maid who crossed it, and the duke who went into the flood, and you refuse the arithmetic, exactly as he did. There are no small lives. There is no one who is not worth the river. That is what your grandfather taught the whole valley, with his own body, in the flood. It is the truest thing I know. And across the room the Duke of Rothmere, old now, and awake still, awake every day of the long alive years she had given him, looked up from his book and met his wife's eyes, and neither of them needed to say anything, because they had said it all in a river a lifetime ago, when a duke refused the arithmetic of the world and went in after a housemaid, and came out with the whole of the rest of his life,